It was a bright Monday morning in Lagos when Amarachi Nwosu stepped into the glass-walled boardroom of Vantage Global, one of the biggest tech companies in Africa. The air inside was cold, smelling of perfume and power. Her palms were slightly sweaty as she clutched her folder, the same folder that carried her dreams, her CV, and years of hard work. She had practiced her answers all night, repeating them softly in her tiny Yaba apartment, trying to make her English sound perfect. But no matter how much she tried, her Igbo accent always came through. It wasn't something she could hide, it was part of her. Still, she had learned that in Lagos, people sometimes judged more by how you sound than by what you can do. As she looked around the long table filled with sharp suits and cold stares, she whispered to herself, "Just breathe, Amarachi. You belong here." Her heart pounded, but she straightened her shoulders and forced a small, confident smile. Outside the glass walls, the city buzzed with life, cars honking, people chasing dreams. Inside, Amarachi was about to fight for hers. She didn't know yet that this interview would change everything. Snah bajblay fruit. He'd serve in a year 30 the hurry off miss that. Deathing the array often. Say, hurry fithosish. Madna he bulbs out and then a shelf for a hawkish arome. And he keeps naked may ask that it's such dirt or reveals that. All be the sarkach nish can eat skull at zero and the onion nester. Snatch out rather fitty when the stone or fight off bish. Do I have a sniff it on while on. Thnarch the out clear silver. I had to stray him if I her freaking it. Maast said the little room, and I get us in the third bomb sickatish, and I wish it to be for reached our metals. So we shooted out city to rot ahead, snit nestle for us navida he trophy wind up. Find it so we sure feeling after we've written it sit that fluster lost dash. Snitch scratched her silk like scratched our silk that need at stand ill and mum said the for a horse girl dash. All the litter her has knit. Floor schnicks over marks out or hanging specsish. Schnell from the dish. Sasher and his neck be not gel file load of liver. Here we're better his army. Sir be brother spill foot in your nester. He'll out look us met voice. Still even mercy skells noisish. Tharps her not up soon it as if still else nealer than. He locks it the worm skill which nish gizzard or greenish divino. Cab me lambs for that's it. He that's the fuss over. He'll elf bessish. And now we're right in home to. Fish more when they turn at either feet or rodish. I'm snow with the one I but the deer knitter wolf Betsy star met zenus. As the questions began, Amarachi felt a little more confident. She opened her folder, looked at the panel, and started explaining her experience in software development. Her voice was calm, clear, and full of purpose. She spoke about the app she had built for rural schools, a project that helped hundreds of children learn, even without internet access. For a moment, she forgot her fear. She spoke from the heart, with passion in every word. But before she could finish, one of the interviewers interrupted her with a mocking grin. "Sorry, can you repeat that?" he said, tilting his head like he was struggling to hear. Then he exaggerated her pronunciation, mimicking her accent. The others laughed, not loudly, but just enough for her to hear the quiet cruelty in their voices. Amarachi froze for a second, her heart dropped, and her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She wanted the ground to open and swallow her. For a moment, she thought about just saying thank you and leaving the room. But then she remembered all the sacrifices that brought her here. Her mother's prayers, her late nights coding on an old laptop, her dream of proving that brilliance doesn't come with a fancy accent. So she took a slow breath. "Yes," she said softly, forcing a smile. "I'll explain again." Her tone was calm, but her eyes carried quiet fire. She repeated herself, this time even clearer, walking them through her project's design, the impact it had made, and the data behind it. The laughter died down. Even the man who mocked her stopped smiling as she spoke with confidence and precision. Her words carried strength, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that commands respect without asking for it. Inside, Amarachi told herself, they can laugh at my accent, but they can't laugh at my results. And for the first time, one of the panelists looked at her, really looked, not as a joke but as someone worth listening to. Inside, Amarachi took a deep breath and reminded herself, I am not here to impress them with pronunciation. I am here to prove my mind. The laughter still echoed faintly in her ears, but she pushed it aside and focused on why she came. She looked straight at the panel, her voice steady this time. My last project focused on bringing digital learning tools to rural schools that don't have internet access, she began. Her tone was respectful but confident. We created offline software that allowed students to learn coding, math, and science, even without Wi-Fi. The room went quiet. She could feel their eyes on her now, not mocking but curious. She continued, explaining how she led a small team of volunteers, how they worked from her friend's living room, and how their software had reached over 3,000 students in remote communities across Nigeria. It wasn't easy, she said softly. Sometimes we coded with candlelight because the power kept going off, but we believed education shouldn't depend on location. For a moment no one moved. Even the man who mocked her earlier shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Amarachi noticed it, but she didn't let it distract her. She stayed composed, her hands folded neatly on the table. Deep inside she felt a spark of pride. This was her strength. Not the way she spoke, but the way she thought, the way she built, the way she refused to give up when everyone else did. If they couldn't see her worth through her accent, they would see it through her vision. As she wrapped up her explanation, she caught sight of the quiet older man sitting at the far end of the table. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't judging. He was watching her closely, with a look of quiet respect, as if he saw something the others didn't. Amarachi didn't know who he was, but something in his eyes told her that this moment was far from over. When the interview finally ended, Amarachi could feel her throat tighten. She had given everything. Every word, every idea, every ounce of confidence she had left. She sat up straight, waiting for a reaction, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone in the room had seen her worth. But instead, the lead recruiter leaned back in his chair, forced a polite smile and said, "Thank you, Miss Amarachi. We'll get back to you." His tone was cold, final, the kind of voice people use when they've already made up their mind. Amarachi nodded quietly. "Thank you for your time," she replied softly. She began to gather her things, trying to keep her hands from shaking. The room was silent for a second, until she turned toward the door. That's when she heard one of them whisper, just loud enough for her to catch. She should stick to local startups. This is Lagos, not the village. The others chuckled. The sound hit her like a knife. Her chest tightened, her face burned, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She wanted to turn around and say something, anything, but she didn't. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, forcing herself to keep walking. As she stepped out of the glass doors, the cool air from the hallway touched her face. She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until she finally let it out. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry there. Not in that office. Not in front of people who would take her tears as weakness. When the elevator doors closed behind her, the laughter still echoed in her mind. But underneath the pain, something else began to grow. A quiet strength, a promise to herself. One day, she thought, they will remember this moment, and they will wish they had listened. And as the elevator descended, Amarachi didn't know that the quiet man from the corner had been watching her leave, and he wasn't smiling at all. No verhangers, right that's it, didn't it lock no. Gosh, no, it's that's it, weakness. Did not cross each army. We did so real if it's nimmerished. Harold Freddy has gave the steel carrot maxil. He'll yell best nimmer with my am say. Herbs a whaler it's over. Did he perish? Nimmerished. Herbs him that he shot each army and it got self. My aunt and you know more on stealing sir. We sit galdum nimmerished. Doing it nimmer with. It's here her hand listen but I see starme. All bulks this knave murphs it. He starme sim in feed. Nay, or they knock up so fly me smack. Well, here's nay or feed me one murph it is the sahish. Herman one. Sab no for net such. Smash master a horse did a. Hermer mish. Am puffy is not in blushby. Dead see shower the number see what I am sir thummer. All best the note of near sir thummer her she Fan geld wat verwend o ahmaste, saber neveish, toch neve net per quite nemmerf, ngearst at sich de shavim, flasser her strips a wish, Snoop sharp at serum empty. Arch deliver lock at this ovni come. Hurt fallet skirms. Hanging and murfnemo mir vet elf birnammer. Sir Wan it's just and dahish and near spot baller hanger it's. We've written it in murfzelf me in your woods. Dabber not as ish. Snelly as it with as knit. Snets it in their own mussing fallow be. Ngemaster erenation nasrock. So and the valles of that side is it. The next morning Amarachi woke up before sunrise. She couldn't sleep much anyway. Her mind was spinning all night. She carefully ironed her best outfit, a neat navy blue blazer paired with a simple Ankara blouse her mother had sewn for her years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it carried meaning. It was her reminder of where she came from and why she started. After a short prayer, she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Whatever happens today, walk in with grace." When she arrived at Vantage Global, the receptionist looked surprised to see her again. "Good morning, Miss Amarachi," she said politely but with curiosity. Amarachi smiled faintly and replied, "Good morning. I'm here to see the chairman." The words felt unreal even as she said them. As she stepped into the same boardroom, the atmosphere shifted. The same recruiters from yesterday were already there, preparing for another round of interviews. The moment they saw her, their faces changed, shock, confusion, and maybe a little guilt. One of them whispered under his breath, "You again." Another frowned, pretending to focus on his tablet. Before anyone could say another word, the door opened quietly. In walked the same older man from the corner yesterday, the one who had watched everything. The moment he stepped in, the room fell completely silent. His presence carried a kind of calm authority that needed no introduction. "Good morning, everyone," he said in a deep, steady voice. The recruiters stood up instantly, greeting him with nervous smiles. Amarachi watched him, realization slowly dawning. He's the chairman. The man she thought was just an observer was actually the most powerful person in the company. He turned his gaze toward Amarachi and gave her a small, warm smile, the kind that made her heart steady again. "Miss Amarachi," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I'm glad you came back." At that moment, the same people who mocked her accent the day before couldn't even look her in the eye. The chairman looked at Amarachi for a moment, his eyes calm and kind. Then, to everyone's surprise, he spoke. Not in English but in smooth, fluent Igbo. "Kidu Ndebuani," he said gently. "How are you, my child?" The room went completely silent. The recruiters froze, eyes wide. No one had expected that. Amarachi blinked in shock, her lips parting slightly. For a moment, she couldn't even find her voice. Then slowly, a small smile appeared on her face as she replied softly, "Adiname, sir." "I'm fine, sir." The warmth in her voice carried both surprise and emotion. It was the first time that day she felt truly seen, not as a candidate, not as an accent to be mocked, but as a person. The chairman nodded, smiling proudly. "Oh, DMMA," he replied, still in Igbo, meaning that's good. Then he switched back to English, his tone steady but firm. "You know," he said, glancing around the room, "I come from Enugu. I built this company with this same accent. The same one you laughed at yesterday." The words hit like thunder. The recruiters shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. A heavy silence filled the room. Amarachi could almost hear her own heartbeat. The chairman turned his gaze back to her. "When I heard you speak," he said softly, "I saw myself. Your confidence, your ideas, your dignity. That's what we need in this company." His words carried weight, and even those who had laughed now looked ashamed. Amarachi's eyes glistened, but she kept her composure. She had no words, only gratitude. For the first time, someone powerful had looked past her accent and seen her truth. In that moment, everything shifted. The girl they mocked yesterday now stood at the center of respect. The same voice they laughed at had just echoed in the chairman's own language. And in that quiet boardroom, Amarachi's story began to change forever. The chairman looked at Amarachi for a moment, his eyes calm and kind. Then, to everyone's surprise, he spoke. Not in English but in smooth, fluent Igbo. "Kidu Ndebuani," he said gently. "How are you, my child?" The room went completely silent. The recruiters froze, eyes wide. No one had expected that. Amarachi blinked in shock, her lips parting slightly. For a moment, she couldn't even find her voice. Then slowly, a small smile appeared on her face as she replied softly, "Adiname, sir." "I'm fine, sir." The warmth in her voice carried both surprise and emotion. It was the first time that day she felt truly seen, not as a candidate, not as an accent to be mocked, but as a person. The chairman nodded, smiling proudly. "ODMMA," he replied, still in Igbo, meaning that's good. Then he switched back to English, his tone steady but firm. "You know," he said, glancing around the room, "I come from Enugu. I built this company with this same accent. The same one you laughed at yesterday." The words hit like thunder. The recruiters shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. A heavy silence filled the room. Amarachi could almost hear her own heartbeat. The chairman turned his gaze back to her. "When I heard you speak," he said softly, "I saw myself. Your confidence, your ideas, your dignity. That's what we need in this company." His words carried weight, and even those who had laughed now looked ashamed. Amarachi's eyes glistened, but she kept her composure. She had no words, only gratitude. For the first time, someone powerful had looked past her accent and seen her truth. In that moment, everything shifted. The girl they mocked yesterday now stood at the center of respect. The same voice they laughed at had just echoed in the chairman's own language. And in that quiet boardroom, Amarachi's story began to change forever. The chairman turned slowly to face the panel, his expression calm but serious. The silence in the room was thick. No one dared to move. Then in a firm, clear voice he said, "While you were busy mocking her accent, you failed to hear her ideas. Ideas that could change the future of this company." Every recruiter froze. The laughter and pride they had shown the day before vanished in an instant. Some looked down at their notes, pretending to be busy. Others just stared at the table, too embarrassed to meet his eyes. The chairman continued, his tone still controlled but sharper now. "You see, this young woman talked about connecting rural schools through technology, something even this company has struggled to achieve. She came here with a solution, and you reduced her to her accent." His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "That's not the culture I built this company on." Then, he turned back to Amarachi and smiled gently. "I come from Enugu myself," he said. "When I started this company, I worked from a small one-room office. I spoke with this same accent you just heard from her. People mocked me too. They said a man who sounded like me could never build a global brand." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. "But here we are today. A company worth billions, built on the voice they once laughed at." Amarachi's chest tightened. She felt her eyes water, but she blinked quickly to hold it back. The chairman's story mirrored her own, the same pain, the same strength. He looked around the room once more and said quietly, "Maybe next time you'll listen to the voice behind the accent, not the sound of it." The room was silent. The recruiters who once laughed now wished they could disappear. And Amarachi, the girl who had walked in feeling small, now stood taller, because the man with the most power in the room had just spoken her truth out loud. The chairman's voice grew firmer, cutting through the thick silence in the room. "This young woman's project," he said, glancing at Amarachi, "aligns perfectly with our next expansion plan." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. The recruiters exchanged nervous glances, unsure what was coming next. Then he continued, "From today, she's not applying for a job. She's leading our new community tech program as project director." For a few seconds no one breathed. The words hit like lightning. Gasps echoed around the boardroom. Amarachi blinked, stunned, trying to process what she just heard. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked up at the chairman, wondering if she'd imagined it. But his calm, proud smile told her it was real. The same people who had laughed at her accent just yesterday now sat frozen, faces pale, eyes darting between her and the chairman. The lead recruiter, who had mocked her the loudest, tried to force a smile, but his voice caught in his throat. Another one coughed awkwardly, pretending to adjust his tie. None of them could look at her. Amarachi's heart pounded in her chest. A wave of emotion rushed through her, disbelief, pride, relief, and a quiet sense of justice. She stood up slowly, her knees almost weak, and managed to whisper, "Thank you, sir." Her voice cracked slightly, but it was steady enough to carry across the room. The chairman nodded. "No, thank you," he said. "You reminded this company of something we forgot, that true innovation doesn't come dressed in accent or appearance. It comes from passion." Amarachi took a deep breath. The same room that had once humiliated her was now the room where her destiny changed. The same people who had tried to make her feel small were now silent witnesses to her rise. As she looked around the table, she didn't smile out of revenge. She smiled out of strength. Because in that moment, every insult, every doubt, every laugh had turned into her victory. Amarachi stood there for a moment, still trying to take it all in. Just yesterday, these same people had laughed at her, mocked her accent, and dismissed her like she didn't belong. But now, every single one of them sat silent, unable to even look her in the eye. She could feel their discomfort, their regret, their shame filling the air. Slowly, she turned toward them, her eyes calm but powerful. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't gloat. She simply spoke from the heart. "You were right," she began softly. "I may sound different, but that difference is my strength." Her voice didn't shake. It carried quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. "This accent," she continued, "is not something to be ashamed of. It carries my story, where I come from, the people who raised me, the dreams that built me. Every word I speak reminds me of home, and I will never hide that again." No one dared to move. The recruiters who once smirked now looked down, their faces red with embarrassment. One of them tried to mutter an apology, but Amarachi simply smiled gently. "It's okay," she said. "You taught me something valuable. Sometimes people laugh at what they don't understand, but one day they'll have to listen." The chairman watched her proudly, his eyes soft with approval. "Well said," he murmured. In that moment, Amarachi didn't just win a position. She earned respect. Her dignity, her grace, and her strength filled the entire room. She didn't need revenge or anger. Her victory spoke louder than any insult ever could. As she gathered her things, her heart felt light. The same voice they once mocked had now opened doors they could never close. And for Amarachi, this wasn't just a win. It was proof that staying true to herself was the most powerful answer she could ever give. By afternoon, the whole building was buzzing. Phones pinged, emails popped up, and whispers spread like wildfire through every floor of Vantage Global. The company's official memo had just gone out, and at the top of the message, bold and clear, were the words: "New appointment, Amarachi Nwosu, Project Director, Community Tech Expansion. Approved by Chairman Obiora Ease." The moment people read it, the entire office came alive. In the marketing department, someone gasped out loud, "Wait, isn't she the girl they said had the strong accent?" In HR, two staff members exchanged looks, realizing they had just witnessed a moment that would be remembered for years. Some employees smiled, genuinely proud. Others sat in quiet guilt, remembering how they had laughed behind her back the day before. Even the cafeteria was filled with chatter. "The chairman chose her himself?" one person said in disbelief. "He never does that." Another added softly, "Maybe it's time we stop judging people by how they sound." Meanwhile, Amarachi sat in her new office, a small but bright corner space overlooking the city. She reread the email, her name shining on the company-wide memo. Her heart swelled with emotion. She remembered every sleepless night, every rejection, every cruel word. And now here she was, not as a rejected applicant but as a leader. She whispered to herself, smiling faintly, "They tried to silence my voice. Now it echoes through their inboxes." Across the building, screens glowed with her name. The woman they once mocked had become the face of the company's future. And in every corner of Vantage Global, people began to see what true strength looked like. It sounded like Amarachi Nwosu. The moment couldn't stay hidden for long. Someone from HR, who had secretly recorded the scene in the interview room, uploaded a short clip online that evening. The video showed the exact moment the chairman greeted Amarachi and Ebo, shocking the entire panel. The caption was simple but powerful. "They mocked her accent until the chairman spoke in it." Within hours, the clip spread like wildfire across social media. By midnight, it had already hit 1 million views. People all over Africa shared it with tears, pride, and admiration. The comments section was flooded. "This gave me chills. Respect to that chairman. She carried herself with so much grace. Never be ashamed of your roots." News blogs picked it up. Influencers reposted it with heartfelt captions. Even on LinkedIn, professionals from across the continent were talking about it. About the power of staying true to yourself, about how prejudice still exists in modern offices, and how Amarachi's calm strength turned humiliation into victory. In Lagos, strangers began recognizing her name. Students from small towns messaged her saying, "You made us proud." A radio host in Enugu called her the voice that spoke for a generation. Meanwhile, Amarachi sat quietly at home, scrolling through her phone, overwhelmed by the flood of messages. She wasn't chasing fame, but seeing so many people find courage through her story made her eyes fill with tears. She thought back to that moment in the interview when they laughed at her accent and she smiled. "Maybe God let them mock me," she whispered softly, "so the world could learn through me." By the next morning, hashtags like #SpeakYourLanguage and #ProudlyAfricanAccent were trending across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. The girl they once mocked had become a symbol, not just of success but of pride, identity, and quiet power. Weeks later, Amarachi stood under the bright lights of the African Tech Women's Summit in Nairobi. The hall was packed with hundreds of young women, dreamers, coders, innovators, all waiting to hear her speak. Cameras flashed as she stepped onto the stage in a beautiful Ankara dress, her poise quiet but powerful. She looked out at the faces before her, smiling softly. "A few weeks ago," she began, her voice steady, "I sat in a room where they laughed at my accent. But today I stand here because that same accent carried my story and my strength." The audience listened in complete silence, hanging on to every word. "Your accent tells your story," Amarachi continued, emotion shining in her eyes. "It carries your home, your people, your journey. Never hide it. The world will adjust to your truth, not the other way around." For a second, the hall was completely still. Then, applause thundered across the room. Some women stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. Others cheered, shouting her name. Amarachi smiled, that same calm, proud smile she wore in the interview room weeks ago. Only now it carried the weight of victory. In that moment, she wasn't just the woman they once mocked. She was the voice of every African girl who had ever been told she wasn't enough. A living reminder that dignity speaks louder than perfection, and that true power begins when you speak with pride.